Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Welcome to episode 194, Listener Q&A. I've never done a Q&A episode, and I thought today was a great one to do it because as the new semester has started for many of us, lots of listeners and some of our clients have come in with questions, and I've started compiling these to do a couple of Q&A episodes just to make sure that we're giving advice in somewhat real time. So I've received a couple of these questions just last week. And at the time that this episode is being recorded, it is in mid-September. So hopefully some of this information will be helpful for you. So the first question that I had is a question about writing slowness. I haven't actually done an episode on this, and I may in the future, but essentially this person's concern, and it's a concern that I hear from lots of clients, is that writing is taking too long. They feel like they're writing too slowly. And with one of our clients, when I talked with them on an initial consultation, I said, well, tell me what you mean by slow. And what this person said was that they would have a writing session for an hour. They were trying to do an hour every morning. And what would happen was it would take a very long time for them to get into the writing enough to generate a sentence, maybe a paragraph. And they felt like they just kind of like futzed around in their writing rather than actually generating new content or closing some gaps in logic or doing some organizing in a way that moved it forward structurally. So that's one type of question. Another type of slowness that we get questions about is just that it's slow. They take maybe 10 minutes to kind of mull over every single sentence. And as academics, we're taught to generate all the time. It seems like everything is moving fast around. So some of the quick pieces of advice, and this is definitely a topic I'll dig into at another time, is this. First of all, I would just say that writing can be slow for everybody, even if it doesn't feel like it, and we see other people to do it. It's just we might be slow in different stages. So, for example, on the writing side of things, I can be fast, but on the research side of things with collecting data, it could take me a long time. It could take me a year. It could take me 18 months. And sometimes the project maybe should only be 6 months realistically, but I'm just slow on the research side. Other folks are more slow in terms of reading. So, they can, once they've read what they need to read, then they're able to generate some content a little bit more quickly. So I would just say that, we tend to be slow maybe in different areas. But another thing that can happen, and this is something that might be a bit of a shocker, but I did tell one of the clients that we had a couple years ago that really complained about this, is to say, yes, you are writing too slowly. So sometimes that gut feeling you're having is a real perception. You are writing too slowly, or at least too slowly for the type of academic environment that we're functioning in. And so I threw out a couple of practical strategies that have worked with some of our other clients to get writing happening again. One of the best strategies that we found works really well is using a timer. And I know that we've talked about the Pomodoro technique. I can put a link in the show notes to that if people want to check that out, where you write in these sort of short timed bursts. But in this case, that's not the kind of timer that I'm talking about. Instead, what I'm talking about with a timer is that you actually set a period of time that you're going to do some writing. And at the end, you deliberately look and essentially measure what was your output. How many words did you create? Were you able to write a new page? Could you do a paragraph? And this has I think, two benefits. One is that you have a real sense of how slow you are writing. And it could be that you are writing slow, which can mean all kinds of other things once you know for sure, because the not knowing is part of the problem here. Once you know for sure, then you might know that, hey, it takes you 2 semesters to complete a scholarly article, not one. Or you may have 5 hours scheduled for scholarly writing in a week, but you need 10. So it's better to know these realities now. So that's one of the things that can help. You've actually done some measuring to know for sure. But the other thing is just the act of being kind of like watched or monitored by the timer. Sometimes that's just enough to kind of put you in a mode like beat the clock, where you pay a little bit more attention to time that might be not necessarily wasted, but you know you're moving slow and you're ready to move on. So sometimes those are two techniques. Another thing that I like to do as sort of a third way to mix up any writing slowness is to start the writing session with writing. Too often, writer clients that we have are slow, or that work very slowly tend to just spend a really long ramping up time to get into their writing project. And that's sort of got the effect of using up all the writing time on getting ready to write. And sometimes that getting ready to write time belongs in another time block or in another time before you actually sit down to write. So I'll put in a couple of episodes in our show notes about what you need to do to get ready for the writing. What are your opening rituals? How do you get yourself ready to open a writing session? So I'll put those in there. But those are some suggestions to start if you're somebody that's a slow writer. Another question that we have, this one, I don't know why it made me laugh, but it kind of did. Somebody sent in a question to us because I had been asking around at some of the talks and things that we've been doing out in the field in the fall about our services at Defend, Publish, and Lead. But one of the questions was, I hate scholarly reading. I hate it. And so what happens is I only use kind of the same body of sources that I've been using since 2018, 2019. And they were looking for a way to talk about how scholarly reading can be more enjoyable, maybe, or what to do about this particular problem. But there were a couple things to say. I think all of us feel a pressure about keeping up with scholarly reading, and that we need to know what the latest research is all the time. And that's partially true. Maybe in some fields, that's true. You do need to know, let's talk about like medicine, or this person was talking about these sources from 2018, 2019. Depending on the field, COVID changed a lot in 2020. So maybe, those sources aren't relevant, or they need to at least reflect the realities of what happened after that pandemic. So, that's one thing that I would say is that it's probably the recognition to know that you probably need some updated sources is a good one. You probably do. But I think that you can set some parameters on your scholarly reading to decide, what am I doing and what am I not doing? I'm always a fan of making those decisions ahead of time. So maybe what the way to approach this is to say, okay, in my new writing project right now that I'm working on, I'm going to find 2 sources from 2023 or 2024. This episode's being recorded in September of 2024. So just 2. That's it. Just find 2. And that way you sort of taken off the burden that you maybe have sources that are too old. So maybe a journal won't take your journal article. It's possible that journal, once you submit an article, will say, well, we'd like to see more recent sources, but let them tell you that. That shouldn't slow down your writing. If you get a couple of updated sources in there, a couple is fine. 2 is plenty, particularly if you hate reading. Knowing you have to read 8 or 9 sources, that's going to kill you. So read just 2, find just 2. Look for something that's really targeted, relevant, new research on the subject that you're working with, just enough to get you by on background or in the literature review, and move on. So if that's something, and that's not to say that you don't have to read. Yes, you still do as an academic, but I don't think it has to be this kind of thing where we should be reading every night and, getting all this literature, because that's not practical. It's not practical for a lot of our clients, particularly those with families. We have a lot of academic mothers that work with us, academic caregivers. You just don't have time. And I've even talked about it in the podcast on my own writing, my reading strategies. I'm doing my scholarly reading in a school pickup line where I have around 30 to 35 minutes a day to kill time. And that's all I do. I read when I can read in there. If I get through 1 article a month, great. If it's 2, great. But that's it. Only on the weekdays. I don't worry about it at another time. I used to read when I was a lot younger. I used to read at night, but yeah, I can't do that or I'll fall asleep over a scholarly article. But, that's a way to do it. This would be a third question I want to put out in this episode. And we have a part 2 coming up for this episode. So if you're like, that's not my question, I want to know another one. But this question, I think, was also a really good one. The third question was about writing with students. And it just was a general question, like, should you try to publish with students? And then the person that asked the question went on to just say, it's acceptable in my discipline, but I don't know if I want to do it. What are the benefits? And so on. So I want to say a couple things about it. And one of the things I would say about writing with students is to consider why you want to do it in the first place. Most of the time when we write with students, we're writing as a benefit to them, not to us. And that's fine. That's very noble. That's very generous, particularly for, senior scholars, for people that are past the tenure track and have been tenured. What a great way to mentor, faculty that are coming up behind you, or especially if we're talking about in the case of women or scholars of color or somebody that is in an identity group that you want to support. That is definitely a way that you can do it. You can do some writing with students. So the first one though is I just try to figure out what is it that you want out of that. Sometimes it's because students are working in, say, your lab, and you want them to get some credit for the hard work that they're doing. That's another thing. You also need to consider what you want to do about authorship. In some cases, you might decide, we're going strictly alphabetical, or the primary investigator, if that's you as the faculty member, or the senior graduate student, if that's you, you're the person that gets the lead author slot, depending on your discipline where that is. Sometimes that can be negotiated, where maybe if you're working with students, you work with 3 or 4, 2 of them are really doing quite a bit on the project, and then maybe 2 others are not doing quite as much. So you can kind of figure that out. And as the faculty writer or the senior graduate student writer on the project, you can determine those parameters ahead of time. Because another thing that we recommend in one of our episodes on collaboration is making the rules clear ahead of time about what's happening in terms of work, who's doing what, how are we going to figure it out? Are we writing together? Are we not writing together? And then finally, I would say I would pay attention to a contingency plan. This is a word I throw out all the time when I work with collaborative authors, when they come to us at Defend, Publish, and Lead. We do workshops on collaboration all the time, because this is tough when you're collaborating with other faculty members or other academics. We know it's tough even working with those people, but working with students, you have to have some kind of a contingency in there, meaning what happens if somebody doesn't do the work, or they do it so poorly there's no way that it could go into that scholarly publication. There has to be some discussion about that up front. So one of the things I could encourage faculty collaborators to do is decide when is silence or a refusal to keep doing the work, or essentially like passing the buck, like, oh, I'll get to that next week, or I'm sorry I'm late, I'll give it to you next Tuesday. How many times is too many before that person goes off the project, or they go to the last author slot, whatever the least desirable slot is? It's a good way to figure it out ahead of time, but also to show students that it might not be, and it shouldn't really be, like a class where maybe you don't turn in the work, you get the 0, it doesn't hurt anybody else. It hurts everybody else when you're doing a scholarly writing project. So, and then along that lines, thinking about writing with students, you can think through if you want it to be part of a class project. Particularly, I'm not a fan of doing it where you're assigning a grade to it, because scholarly writing is a whole different thing. Often students need mentoring to do it. You have to show them your process and how you're doing it. And so what I like instead is to just invite the interested after a course project is complete. So when they're no longer your students, you're on a better playing field in terms of them being co-writers with you. I like to do it sometime after that and invite just the interested into it, set up the rules, say this is how we're going to do it. And I also like a semester timeline where the work does not last longer than a semester, because if you're going to write with students, they graduate, they leave. And we know how long journal turnaround times take. So you want to ideally maybe write with these students in a way that you'll still be able to talk to them when the reviews come back for a revise and resubmit. So hopefully these questions have been helpful in some of the quick answers. We'll do more on these episodes, but as always, if you have a question, you're welcome to send it in. You can email Christine at defendpublishlead.com to get a question in there. You can also fill out an interest form on our website with your question. We get them that way all the time. And finally, I want to point out that we are hosting a free upcoming webinar on scholarly reading. I will put the link in the show notes. You can also find that on Eventbrite for Defend, Publish, and Lead. And that is on October 4th. So if you want to join us for that, you can register to attend live or get the recording. But it's free, and it's all about how to get your scholarly reading into your writing. Happy writing this week.